The issue here is the classic debate in terms of, well, how much is the MCU really based on the comics? And I agree with most of what he's saying, that there's really no connection. So for the most part, there's only a superficial connection between the comics and the MCU, and often the stories are better in the original comics. That should be really damning in terms of the general tone of the MCU. But I disagree with him where he's going with Black Widow. I would give Black Widow a 6.5 out of 10. I'm not going to do a full review here. We'll do that in another video essay. But I disagree that Black Widow herself is that far apart from the comics. But I agree, generally speaking, they did move away from the comics with Red Guardian and the Taskmaster. So there's a lot of things in Black Widow you can fault. However, I'm going to be slightly defensive of Kevin Feige. I'm not a Kevin Feige fan. I recognize that he doesn't really know the comics, and he's been very inconsistent in sort of giving good stories or even being faithful. But I don't think he's fairly summing up the charges. But I think, again, I am with him in spirit that there is something problematic going on.
Kevin Feige told y'all blatant. Victoria Alonso told y'all blatant. This is what they give a fuck about. Victoria Alonso sat and lied like the sack of shit she is, talking about they pay attention to the comic books. They almost follow them to a T. That was the quote that she had nerve to fucking use. Let me find the exact quote because I don't want to get straw man here. So for any of the crackheads who watch my videos and they're like, well, no, it's different. No, this is what this heifer said. I'm gonna show you right here with the receipts. Covering this from the CBR, who is covering it from Variety. This is what this heifer said. I'm gonna find it. Here it is. Don't forget, we follow our comics. We try to follow them quite to a T. That's a fucking lie. You're lying to my face. Or no, rather, you're pissing on the audience and telling them that it's rain. That's what you're doing, taking a goddamn leak on them. No, you're a liar. And then they'll talk at the other side of their mouth. Kevin Feige talks at the other side of his mouth talking about they don't even give a fuck about the source material. That's why they used the Eternals in the first place, because they were like, well, these are characters we know a lot of these folks don't know about, so we're going to fucking get them and put them out there and change them up fucking and just... The Eternals cast, none of them are basically playing their counterparts. None of them. They have them in name. Selma Hayek is playing fucking Ajax, bro. That makes no sense. Oh, well, she's the best person for the job. No, you fucking liar. That was a purposeful casting and it sucks. Period. No. That's bullshit. That's bullshit. They're all in on bringing the characters up and trying to tell stories within a universe. And the characters don't have to act. They don't even have to look. Sometimes they'll slightly look like him. Spider-Man kind of, when he's in a suit, sometimes kind of looks like Peter Parker. He's not. He doesn't act like him, but you get what I'm saying.
Careful. I don't think, as he says, she's lying or she's a sack of shit, because context is important when she's saying, because again, within that statement, he doesn't read it, but she says, you know, it honestly doesn't matter to me. And she's talking about Loki being queer. So that's very key. The context is key because she's speaking of Loki. So within that boundary, what she's saying is true, that they're following the comics. Because again, roughly speaking, a lot that isn't Loki the series is in the comics, with the TVA, Loki being gay, and Loki having a kind of female counterpart. So within the boundaries of that statement, she's not lying. There's no gaslighting. But he is correct that there is an inconsistency with Feige, because he says at various points, well, we're not really going to do the comics and we're going to do our own thing. And with the Eternals, yes, he's right that they are admitting that, well, these characters are kind of obscure, so we can do whatever we please with them. But again, I disagree that, you know, they just picked Salma Hayek because whatever. It's like, no, she's a good actress. I do think they picked her on the basis of merit and talent, but he is right. These are not the Eternals. I know the cosmic Marvel comics pretty well. I know Thanos. I know Silver Surfer. I know Adam Warlock. I don't know who these Eternals are, so I was just confused when they announced this thing. I'm like, who are these people? And they're like, oh, they're connected to the Celestials. And I'm like, I've read about the Celestials. I'm like, but I was honestly confused. So even somebody who's familiar with the cosmic part of Marvel Comics, and I really like those comics, I have quite a few of them, I'm like baffled, like, the Eternals? Why are you using the Eternals? He is right that there is hypocrisy, but I don't know if you can say full-blown they're just completely gaslighting in every case. I do think, though, not with Black Widow, but with Eternals, they are doing gaslighting. So With Black Widow, they are skewing things. I have no doubt about that. But I would say to match the quality score, it is kind of like 60% of the comic. Because again, it is a Black Widow movie. She is more or less like the comics. But elsewhere, yeah, they're going completely off and doing their own thing. So the debate is going to boil down to what is the purity scale? I would say it's within a range of 60 to 70%. If they're getting at least 60 to 70% of the character, then I think it's legit to say, this is that. Most of the MCU would fail that score, right? That he's correct. But there are going to be exceptions to the rule, so I think we'll be sensitive to context. So let's use something like Infinity War and Endgame. I think in those cases, like Thanos is 1 out of 10, right? In other words, there's only a 10% correspondence between Thanos in the MCU and Thanos in the comics. So there's really no relationship. So you can say that, Infinity War and Endgame are good movies. I don't think they are. I think they're terrible. I think they're garbage. I think they're really, really not good films. But you don't want to say this is Thanos or that's Thanos. That's not Thanos. That has only a bare relationship to Thanos in the comics. So calling him Thanos is just misleading. He's not Thanos. He's some weirdo creation they just made up for money. But again, I think my own way of doing this is let's go case by case and be careful because like the Raimi Spider-Man is not Spider-Man. They really changed a lot from the comic, but those films were okay, right? I'm not going to go through the whole trilogy and give my scores there. So I think we want to be sensitive case by case basis. So I don't think they're pissing on the audience, but are they misleading us in certain cases? Yes, but I would be more comfortable with a more case by case approach because, again, the outlook is not good. I agree. The outlook is not very good, but we have to allow that there may be exceptional cases where the films are of higher quality or they may do a story better than the comics. They haven't so far. I don't think I can name a single MCU film that is better than the comic book version, but it may happen in the future. So I just want to be more open minded than he is. But I do think he's correct that something problematic is occurring with the MCU. But I think Black Widow is a legit 6.5 out of 10. It's much better than I expected. You can say it's not a very good film, but I do think it's an okay film. In terms of canon, and we'll just disagree. I agree that if you're a purist, this is not good enough. But I think even as a purist myself, I think within the 60 to 70% range, they do enough that's more or less like the comics. So I think you can, it's a borderline case, it's right on the edge, but I think you can say it's enough like the comics and say it is problematic, but you can say they are, at least in this case, being faithful. So they're not lying. But again, it's a very tricky case. And that's where I stand. So we're going to keep getting into this in terms of the difficulty of fidelity within the MCU. Thank you for listening.